The time has come for my people to go.
I'm not a queen, I'm a servant of the people. I'm not a king, I'm a servant of the people. It's what the people demand, and we gonna keep fighting till we get that land. I'm not a queen, I'm a servant of the people. I'm not a king, I'm a servant of the people. It's time to rise, to get what we want, we got to organize.
Good morning, good day, good afternoon, good evening, good night, good people, good comrades, wherever you are in the world. I am Jamilah, here to bring you another episode of the Pantsula Podcast, as presented by the All-African People's Revolutionary Party, of which I am an organizer. The objective of the All-African People's Revolutionary Party is one unified Africa under scientific socialism. If you have any questions about what that means, you can contact us or our international site, A-APRP-INTL.org. Of course, before we begin, we must honor our ancestors, because without them, there would be no us. On this episode, we are honoring Manucha Algarín and José Leonardo Chirino. Manucha Algarín was a Maroon, hailing from Barlovento in the Miranda state in Venezuela. In 1768, after escaping enslavement, she was one of the founders of the Cumbe de Acota, one of the first liberated areas in Venezuela. In the midst of fighting against the Spanish army, she was arrested and tortured and murdered. José Leonardo Chirino, also hailing from Venezuela, participated in leading an uprising in Santa Ana de Coro. In May of 1795, Chirino participated in armed struggle, in which the objective was the abolition of slavery and establishment of a democratic republic. His wife, Maria de los Dolores, also participated in the protest. The conditions upon his death sentence were that their children, Maria Viviana, Rafael Maria, and Jose Hilario, ended up being sold. On this day, I'm here to talk about work. What do you think about when you talk about work? How many of us accept or tolerate the conversation around the work ethic? I'll give you a second to think about it. Okay, did you think about it? We have to remember that ethics are built around particular societal guidelines. It's what a particular society deems as acceptable. Those who go the extra mile are seen as having a work ethic. When you get even more specific, particular types of vocations are seen as real jobs, and even then, only a smaller amount of them are valued as being on the upper end of the employment hierarchical chain. You know, like someone who is a CEO somehow deserves to be making more money than a person at a fast food restaurant. Despite that fast food employee going overtime and fulfilling the requirements of having a solid work ethic, their being not as deserving of being paid a higher wage gets into a conversation about morals, that barometer produced by an individual that determines what is right or wrong. The commingling of ethics and morals when it comes to employment reads like this. A person who has a job at a fast food restaurant is not deserving of a higher wage because they do not work as hard as the CEO. Even if one were to believe that, there's clear countering evidence even in popular culture, which shows such as Undercover Boss. For dramatic effect, they highlight the person who is on the clock 60 hours a week to help pay for a parent or child's medical bills. The president or CEO or brand officer feels moved enough to give them a week-long vacation or to hand them $5,000. Of course, there are many an episode where this executive will get down in the trenches and finally understand what it's like to work a shift where you are overwhelmed due to being understaffed. Clearly, this is problematic on numerous levels, as this is deceptive programming. It targets the emotional heartstrings of the viewers, so there's still identification with the one who is profiting off the exploitation of labor. By focusing on the individual who is financially struggling and the chief exploiter being benevolent, the boss is still viewed as a protagonist. Of course, bad workers are highlighted, still upholding this message that the exploitation of workers is not the primary problem. Yes, there are going to be contradictions. There are people who, regardless of whether or not they are at a job, are going to be, for all intents and purposes, mean. Shows like Undercover Boss encourage a dangerous customer is always right ethos, that you must suck it up and smile despite being disrespected by a customer. As an employee, you don't have much of a right to defend yourself against such abuses. It lends to an idea that, in order to be humanized by your exploiters, you must be experiencing extreme life scenarios, and you must be grateful to accept help from them. In programs such as these, there's no space to negotiate your safety, your conditions, or your pay. While these programs are being held as primarily entertainment, anyone who is a keen study of the histories of media rooted in capitalism understand differently. The purpose of a program, regardless of where they come from, is to guide a particular ideological narrative. So here is where we talk about work. The words work and job tend to be interchangeable for many, but honestly, they are not one and the same. A job is what you do in order to meet material needs. Work is something you do to further society in a beneficial way. Shows like Undercover Boss value the concept of a job being virtuous because an actual society that provides free healthcare, housing, and other basic life needs is not. When you accept exploitation of labor as being your lot in life, you accept that you have less time to be creative and to do the things which, again, further benefit society. More and more people, of course, have been openly recognizing their value in accordance to the employment system under capitalism. During the first major wave of this recent ongoing pandemic, let's not forget we are still in one. There have been masses of people who walked out of their jobs, where whole businesses shut down. This was called the Great Resignation. Many sources have noted that wages have been stagnant since the 70s. One source, Forbes magazine, notes this is true. However, the author, Tim Worstall, finds these statistics to be skewed in favor of, quote, political rhetoric, because according to him, said research doesn't account for, quote, the fall in working hours is not allowed for, the increasing amount of non-wage benefits and thus increases in total compensation are not allowed for, and so on, end quote. According to Worstall and those like him, wages should not be increased because employees give less time to a job and they receive an increasing amount of non-wage benefits. $7.25 should continue to be a federal minimum wage in the U.S. because, well, you get money in other ways. I'll let you think about that for a moment. The Great Resignation of 2021 was reported to have happened for several reasons. Health concerns amid the pandemic, a dearth of child care services, and, of course, total burnout. Along with the rise in people quitting, though, comes a larger story. People understand their worth. While this tends to be mostly associated with monetary value, this cannot be the only value. People are being asked to overextend themselves at jobs where they are not being paid to do the jobs they are being asked to do. People are being asked to do jobs which, upon hire, were not in the job description. It happens so often that it's just expected. Back to Undercover Boss. When you go above and beyond, sometimes at risk of your own mental and physical health, it is rewarded. They are also being asked, sometimes forced to, again, take time away from doing something that could positively benefit society. So, people are doing what is recently being called quiet quitting. This term makes little sense unless you are an employer who deems people actually not going above and beyond what their actual job entails as a form of passive-aggressive quitting. Going above and beyond is actually addressed as citizenship behavior. Of course, instead of acknowledging the core problem of labor exploitation, Many an article written about what they are calling a phenomenon or trend aim to address how employers get in front of it by doling out rewards, reassessing motivational tools, listening, and making closer connections. The conversation around acting your wage, which ultimately is what so-called quiet quitting is, goes into a whole other conversation around increasing unionization efforts. While union organizing is nothing new, news around increased efforts in recent times has become part of a larger lexicon. Whether it's big box stores, larger grocery chains, or multinational corporations, employees around the world are protesting their unsafe and low-wage conditions and are organizing to negotiate said conditions. Due to consistent anti-unionization campaigns, when employees actually do form a union, they are penalized for it. Starbucks recently opted for a wage increase for employees, except for one location, which is unionized. The Trader Joe's wine shop, the only one in New York, abruptly shut down right before employees were going public with regard to building with the United Food and Commercial Workers Union. When you begin to examine the objective of employment under a capitalist system, it's easier to understand its role in upholding surveillance. The more your time is tied to a job, the less time you have to question the system which has allowed for these conditions to exist. The moment you deviate from what is perceived as the norm, retaliation occurs. You are increasingly being asked to present your social media accounts as part of an application. You aren't to mention organizing at your job. If you establish a hard so-called work-life balance, you are seen as someone who is not a team player. Just as the ancestors we named faced retaliation and repression for organizing and fighting against enslavement, anyone who organizes and fights wage slavery in this day and age also face retaliation and repression. I shall round out this episode with a couple of passages from The Right to Be Lazy by Paul Lafarge, written in 1883. It states, "To root out laziness and curb the sentiments of pride and independence which arise from it, the author of Essay on Trade proposed to imprison the poor in ideal workhouses, which should become houses of terror, where they should work 14 hours a day in such fashion that when mealtime was deducted, there should remain 12 hours of work full and complete." 12 hours of work a day, that is the ideal of the philanthropists and moralists of the 18th century. How have we outdone this ne plus ultra? Modern factories have become ideal houses of correction in which the toiling masses are imprisoned, in which they are condemned to compulsory work for 12 or 14 hours, not the men only, but also the women and children. And to think that the sons of the heroes of the terror have allowed themselves to be degraded by the religion of work to the point of accepting, since 1848, as a revolutionary conquest, the law limiting factory labor to 12 hours. They proclaim as a revolutionary principle the right to work. Because, lending ear to the fallacious words of the economists, the proletarians have given themselves up body and soul to the vice of work. They precipitate the whole of society into these industrial crises of overproduction which convulse the social organism. Then, because there is a plethora of merchandise and a dearth of purchasers, the shops are closed, and hunger scourges the working people with its whip of 1,000 lashes. The proletarians, brutalized by the dogma of work, not understanding that the overwork which they have inflicted upon themselves during the time of pretended prosperity is the cause of their present misery. Do not run to the granaries of wheat and cry, "We are hungry, we wish to eat." True, we have not a red cent, but beggars as we are, it is we, nevertheless, who harvested the wheat and gathered the grapes. Good people, we are overjobbed and underworked. I'm going to say this again. We are overjobbed and underworked. I shall also reiterate that jobbing and working are not one and the same. What is deemed the right to work is obtaining a job as a necessity to have access to basic material needs like shelter and food. The assumption that people will be lazy if they do not have to work for anything is not only ahistorical, but it ignores the present reality that people actually do work towards a better society outside of their jobs. The framework around being lazy under a capitalist society can only be explained by observing people who are too drained to do much else after giving their time and energy to said job. The right to be lazy in a more humane society is the permission we give ourselves to do the work we actually want to do and need to be doing. And because we are currently living under the conditions of oppression and inequities, joining an organization is always something we're going to encourage. There are various organizations around the world we can work with, participating in a process to create the reality we want to see. If you are aware and have even a minimal understanding of the fact that something is wrong with the society we live in, simply airing passive complaints, that does nothing towards visualizing a solution. Thank you once again for listening to another week of the Pantsula Podcast. This was fairly short, but I think it needed to be said. And if you are interested in other content that has built an analysis around these issues, we have Our Ancestors' Voices, the weekly Pan-African News, Revolutionary African Women, and the Forward Ever podcast. This isn't just content to listen to, it's an aspect of the organizing work. Another way you can present a visual representation of your organizing work is going to the Forward Ever shop, where we have hoodies and t-shirts. Until next time, as we always say, forward ever, backwards never.